Hi guys, it's Julian Hemmings here. I'm sorry for not creating a video in a while. It's been a really hectic week for me, but we've gotten everything squared off. Can't wait to tell you guys more about some projects that I'm bringing out here in relation to business. But I want to talk to you guys about the Jordan Neely case. Before we go into that, I'm going to put my Cash App as in the description box so that you can link to it. You guys can donate to the channel so that I can continue to produce content like this and finally pay my videographer. Anyways, so let's talk about Jordan Neely. Jordan Neely was about 30 years old. He was a performer in New York City, a street performer, someone that went from train to train to train, performing like some Michael Jackson content and so on. However, he had mental health issues. Jordan was about 14 years old. His mother, who was in an abusive relationship with her boyfriend, was murdered by her boyfriend. Her boyfriend ended up putting her body into a bag near the Hudson Parkway. And Jordan at 14 had to testify against him. And his aunt said from this point, he started displaying PTSD, depression, and I believe it was anxiety. It was schizophrenia. So he started showing these traits, and in 2009, this was happened in 2007. In 2009, that's when he started going in street performance. During that time period, he was in foster care, and I think there was a list of 50 New Yorkers who needed help the most to receive housing, and he was on that list by the time that he passed. He ended up going on the train where the man who choked him, Daniel Penny, was, and he started to exhibit certain traits, certain behaviors that I think Mr. Penny's gonna say caused him to be adequately provoked, and in placing Mr. Neely in a chokehold. Mr. Neely also had about 42 arrests. Mr. Neely also had about 42 arrests. 3 of those arrests involved some level of violence. One of the cases involved him grabbing a little girl and running with her alongside on the street or on the sidewalk, and it was pretty tough. Let's talk about who Mr. Penny is. So Mr. Penny was a sergeant Marine, and he was working while he was a Marine. He was selling like surfboards and other aquatic equipment. But then eventually, after his service, he was in New York. He got laid off from his job. After getting laid off from his job, he was looking for work in New York as a New York City bartender. And while he was on the train, saw Mr. Neely exhibit some behaviors. He felt provoked. Him and I believe a couple of other gentlemen restrained Mr. Neely, but Mr. Penny knew the chokehold put which ended up causing him to die. And right now we're in this weird time, right, where we're asking ourselves, was Mr. Penny wrong? Should Mr. Penny go to jail? There's a lot of people who talk about how the New York City subways, how New York City in general feels less safe. There's a growing issue of homelessness in the city. 1 in every 120 New Yorkers will be houseless. 1 in 3 New York City children, unfortunately, live below the poverty line. And this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue here. People are starting to say people have been saying for years that they felt very fearful for their own personal safety, especially after the pandemic. There's been an uptick of violent crimes in New York City. Manhattan DA Alvin Braz and I think Eric Gonzalez and Brooklyn DA have toted that while there is a growing number of complaints around crime generally happening in New York, when it comes to violent crimes, there's been a reduction in them. So there's something to be said about that. However, there is still the crisis of homelessness in that city. And with the growing rent costs, the growing housing costs in general, the higher the taxes, New Yorkers are being squished, man. New Yorkers, it feels like they live day to day to day to day, paycheck to paycheck to paycheck. And if there was any instance of some kind of sickness or any misfortune, New Yorkers could be out on the street, because to be out there is just, is simply unsustainable. And you're getting taxed really highly. You're expecting the money to go to social welfare programs, but you have a major houselessness crisis in New York. You have a major crisis of people with mental health issues that are not receiving any treatment. So the question really goes to how is this money being spent? The legal argument here that the court is likely to hear from the prosecutors against Daniel Penny is probably one of manslaughter. So why is the DA not pursuing murder? Well, it doesn't appear from the facts at hand that Mr. Penny, Daniel Penny, had a malice when he was putting Mr. Neely on the chokehold. So because there's no malice of forethought, you have to go to manslaughter. And so with manslaughter, I think what Mr. Penny will argue was that he was adequately provoked. What that means is someone who feels as though their life was in danger because there was someone who provoked them and they had to act in a way which ended up causing someone to lose their life. Similar to almost like a self-defense argument, but it just shows that the person actually provoked. Mr. Neely will probably argue, his side will probably argue, the prosecutor will probably argue against Mr. Penny, saying that, although Mr. Neely had 42 arrests, Mr. Penny was never aware of this, and that he was just saying words. There was nothing there that should have even resulted in him putting the gentleman in a headlock. So Mr. Penny basically was acting as a vigilante, which the law does not like. And so look, it's going to be a very complicated case, very complicated issues of homelessness, mental health, or lack of mental health treatment, the growing rate of crime in New York City, the fear mongering that's done in the media. It's a lot of issues that are really, really complicated, and this case representing them. The really public policy issue that we have to look at here, guys, is that if the court says that Mr. Penny should not be placed behind bars, will it cause other people to feel like, if they're a poor person of color, a poor black person, and they act out, will it show that there is precedent that other people could kill if they feel certain sense of fear when it comes to poor black people? So it's a very dangerous case with very dangerous connotations and effects. So guys, please continue to follow this case. I'll put a clip after this and you guys can learn some more about it, but thank you again for listening.
A funeral is now planned for next week in Harlem for 30-year-old Jordan Neely. Neely died after being put in a chokehold last week on an F train in the East Village. A grand jury is expecting to discuss possible charges against former Marine Daniel Penny for that chokehold. The Manhattan District Attorney speaking out today about the case for the very first time. Eyewitness News reporter Lucy Yang has details.
Who is to blame for the death of Jordan Neely? The system? He was arrested more than 40 times, known to be violent. And yet the 30-year-old homeless man was free to menace riders on the subways. Or Daniel Penny, the 24-year-old former Marine who put Neely in the deadly chokehold.
I went to pour a little water on Jordan Neely's head, and Daniel Penny came up and told me to stop.
This rider, who has also experienced homelessness, says he was in another car on the train but tried to help.
Sometimes people peer into the silence and look at that as if, well, the office isn't doing anything or it's not important. It's quite the contrary.
The district attorney, for the first time, speaking publicly about this controversial death. As protesters demand an arrest, some of them with blood dripping, we understand a grand jury is scheduled to consider the case sometime this week. 24-year-old Daniel Penny served his country and was currently in college. Demonstrators have now put his face on wanted posters.
My heart breaks when we lost young Jordan. We cannot be so thoughtful on talking about merely how this young man died without answering the question, how was he living?
If Neely had received medical care, would he be alive tonight, free to do his Michael Jackson impersonations? His funeral scheduled for next Friday. Lucy Yang, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Criminally charged former Marine Daniel Penny as early as tomorrow in connection to the chokehold death of Jordan Neely on a subway earlier this month. Now, a reminder here, a portion of the encounter was caught on video. We are going to play some of that video for you this morning, though it may be hard to watch. Penny, you can see him here, accused of putting Neely in a chokehold for nearly 15 minutes. Witnesses say Neely got on that train and was shouting at passengers before this encounter. I want to bring in Stephanie Gosk now. Stephanie, what do we know about the charges here today?
Hey, Aaron, it is a single charge of manslaughter, too. The district attorney says that Daniel Penny will be arraigned tomorrow. This is a charge that is used when someone recklessly causes the death of someone else. It carries a penalty of up to 15 years in prison. Meanwhile, the attorney for Daniel Penny has said that his client acted in self-defense and that he and the other riders in the train were aggressively threatened by Neely that day, and that it was an accidental death.
You know, Steph, we saw protests happen there. There was a lot of pressure. There were people who were, on the tracks in the subway stations in some cases. Was the pressure on officials to do something, to bring charges? Did that have an impact here?
It's a good question. It's really tough to know for sure, Aaron, but our sources had told us that this case was going to be reviewed by a grand jury. That would have taken some time. What this news tonight means is that the district attorney's office has decided to skip that process. Aaron?
All right, Stephanie Gosk for us in New York City today. Steph, thank you.